Then in the last, meaning the practical and theoretical wisdom, is what is intended by the Prophet's statement, and here he quotes without acknowledging a hadith taken from Kitab al-Aql by Dawood ibn al-Muhabbar, where Ali ibn Abi Talib is told by the Prophet, when people draw near to God by means of a variety of righteous acts and devout deeds, then do you yourself draw near to Him by means of your intelligence. إذا تقرب الناس بأبواب البر والأعمال الصالحة فتقرب أنت بعقلك. And then Ghazali goes on to say, the likes of Ali can achieve this drawing close to God through their intelligence, but not everyone can. So he ranks it as the highest form of knowledge. Anyway, what he's doing here is he's integrating different, separate, and up till then relatively opposing strands of experience and teaching into a common position. The theory of the theologians, that knowledge, independent, necessary knowledge, is the essence of intelligence, which is what the Mu'tazila had held, because intelligence for them was the basis for taklif, moral responsibility. And taklif required that you have certain basic knowledge. And once you possess that knowledge, then you were morally responsible, and then God's judgment and hujjah could be operative against you. So it was a theological necessity to have intelligence endowed in the constitution of the human in order for God's judgment, His punishment and reward to be valid. Otherwise God would be unjust. And the Mu'tazili were upholding God's justice at all times. Then also the views of the idea that aql is a ghariza, which was very widespread among the moralists, the ethicists, the ascetics, the traditionalists. They all agreed on that, which included the idea of tafawut, dissimilarity and gradations of intellect, and so on. And then even the notion of theoretical and practical wisdom, which opens up and allows for philosophical wisdom. Anyway, this is a way of extending one's theological and intellectual position through citation of hadith, and by valorizing one's statements and positions by invoking precedents of hadith. In another passage, which is taken from another work of his, Al-Mustafa min ilm al-usul, which is one of his later works, and it's a major text on usul al-fiqh. It's a very important text by Ghazali. By the way, in this book, he gives the four bases of fiqh, usul al-fiqh. You have kitab, you have sunnah, you have qiyas, you have ijma', and the fourth is al-aql. He does not use the word qiyas. And some people feel that he was influenced by someone like Sheikh al-Mufid or the Shia position on this. He doesn't include qiyas as one of the four usul al-fiqh, but he is open to the idea of aql as being the equivalent to it, or maybe as a better substitute for it, or was he somehow smuggling in some philosophical? It's not clear. But it's an interesting thing. And later the Shiite doctors like the Hilla, Allama al-Hilla and others, they quoted Ghazali on this, saying he supports us. He agrees that aql is the fourth usul of the in fiqh. Nevertheless, this passage is very important, and when you read Mustafa carefully, you realize that Ghazali's mysticism and his philosophical preoccupation is already interwoven into his legal theory. He's integrating bits of philosophy into his legal theory. If you don't believe me, then you read this paragraph carefully and consider, if you know Ibn Sina's theory of rational perception and the theory of the stages of the intellect from potential to actual to acquired, you will see that Ghazali is in fact repeating it here and working it into his usul. That's why I feel Professor Wani's judgment of Ghazali is a bit harsh, although he's true in what he says, that he condemned the philosophers. But he may have had to do that for self-protection. And nevertheless, you may take the time to look at it yourself. And I understand this passage, which I've tried to translate very carefully, but you should check the Arabic original to make sure. It's a standard text and easy to find. That it integrates Ibn Sina's psychology of the rational soul, where the intellect and act, al-aql bil-fi'l of the rational soul, receives the impress of the intelligibles and ma'qulat from the active intellect, al-aql al-fa'al, thereby fully actualizing its material potential or preparedness for knowledge by contact with the giver of forms, thus realizing the condition of the acquired intellect, aql al-Mustafa. But he has a different terminology for some of these processes. Finally, I come here with another important thinker, I can't read all of this, but this is a very important text. Al-Raghib al-Isfahani, great Iranian predecessor of Ghazali. Of course, both wrote in Arabic. And his age or time is not clear. Recently there was a new thesis done, I think at Princeton University, in which he's placed earlier than normally thought, meaning even earlier than the dates I give. He was a great Quran savant. He wrote his Mufradat, fi Gharib al-Quran, a book on Quranic terminology. He wrote collections of wisdom, different peoples and races. And he wrote this book, Al-Dhari'a ila Makarim al-Sharia, which has been relatively recently been re-edited in Isfahan by an Iranian scholar. And it's a very important text of ethics, in which he shows that without ethics, the Sharia is no good, basically. I mean, I'm putting it crudely. That without the makarim of the Sharia, makarim al-akhlaq, then to enforce Sharia blindly without that spirit of ethical wisdom and intelligence is a travesty of Sharia, right? So he's not a faqih, but he's trying to educate the fuqaha to be more intelligent and wise in applying Sharia by having the principles of ethics uppermost. It's a very important book, and it's clear that he integrated the philosophical notions of Ibn Sina or people like him before him into his ethical teaching. And if we read carefully the passages where he treats aql, which is a very major section of the book, you will see clearly this was the man who influenced Ghazali in the direction of taking from the philosophers into his own. Ghazali said when he left Baghdad, after he gave up his chair in the Nizamiya, he carried a copy of Dhari'a in his pocket at all times. That was a famous statement of his. But listen, when we read Gharaghib, it's worth repeating a few of these things. We're on page 11 now. Aql, first intellect in philosophy. He introduces the section on Fadilat al-Aql, the surpassingness of intelligence. Or maybe here we should start translating it as intellect, question mark, by invoking this famous hadith. He says, Aql is the first immaterial substance, awwalu jawhar, brought into existence by God. The most sublime ashraf creation, according to the indication of what the Prophet reported, said, the first thing God created is al-Aql. Then he said to him, face forward, so I do near, etc. By means of thee do I receive, by means of thee do I bestow. This is very similar to the version by Muhammad al-Baqir. And he doesn't give an isnad. This is so famous now, this hadith, that you don't need to quote the isnad. It's like if I say, utlub al-ilm hatta sin. Should I give you the isnad so you're sure that it's a good hadith? But you know what? Da'if. It's not accepted by the hadith critics as a good hadith. It's weak. But everyone loves the hadith so much they repeat it and they never bother about the isnad. It's okay. Tasahul fil hadith. Leniency. When the hadith has a very good purpose and utility, why bother about the isnad? Okay? We have to reject so many hadith if we insisted on good isnad. Yes, I suppose so. Al-Qadariyya Majuz Hadihi al-Ummah. Nevertheless, the point is that now we get the form awwalu ma khalaqa. Now, if he died around 400 maybe, this is end of 3rd century, beginning of late 4th, early 5th century, but already well before then we know, according to other indications, that the form lamma khalaqa began to go out of use, and the new form appeared awwalu ma khalaqa. أول ما خلق الله العقل كما ثم قال له, in which case the first phrase is a complete independent sentence. The first that God created is al-aql, period. Then, thereupon, so he said to it, come forward, draw near. So that means that the aql hadith has now become cast as a first creation. And in that form, there is no isnad applied. Because the isnad, there was never any hadith awwalu ma khalaqa with an isnad. It was never a riwayah with an isnad. In its isnad form, it was always lamma khalaqa Allah. But we have already seen a movement towards a first creation. We have a condition where al-qalam is awwalu ma khalaqa already. We have a situation where lamma khalaqa Allahu al-aql is cast in the form by certain circles as in the throne realm among the ruhaniyun, the spiritual immaterial beings who are very close to the beginning of creation in the throne realm. We already have an impetus towards moving this entity called al-aql, which is envisioned in that context as a figure for wisdom, which is both a human trait and a heavenly trait, just as wisdom is in the Old Testament, as it is in the Bible, where the teaching about wisdom and Sophia became part of the emerging Christology of the Christian communities, and where Gnostics had elevated Sophia into a cosmic principle, and with the rabbis, where Chokhmah became a principle at the origin of creation along with the Torah, and in Iranian realm, in a very important teaching called Menowi Khrad, where Khrad wisdom is seen at the origin of the cosmos. These were all pre-Islamic, preceding Islam, the kind of intellectual and spiritual teachings which gave an impetus for the Muslim tradition to embrace them and integrate them in their own way to evolve the lamma khalaqa form into an awwalu ma khalaqa form. The people who probably took the lead in this were the Ismailis. We can't prove it. Most of their early literature is lost. That's my deduction. In the early Druze literature, the Druze are an Ismaili Ghulat sect who founded their own branch of religion. They survive today in Lebanon and Syria and Jordan. They have a book called Rasa'il al-Hikmah. It's secret. It's only shared among their initiates. And they have one of their books is called Kashf al-Haqa'iq. And in the whole book, the whole writing, it's a letter, is based on this hadith. But it's been transformed into a cosmology which explains their worldview. But it's based on this hadith of when God created the intellect. And it's cast in the form of first thing that God created. Now the Druze, that was at the end of the 300s. Al-Hakam bi Amrillah. And so we know that the Druze and the Ismaili had a teaching which was using this hadith but impregnated with Hellenic philosophical ideas as found, for example, in the longer version of the theology of Aristotle. So we have a context in which certain radical Shiite circles open to Greek philosophy, certain Sufi circles, and now emerging philosophical circles in Sunni domain have all adjusted themselves to the idea that Aql can be first creation. It's complex, it's not clear, it needs to be worked on, and related to this, of course, is the notion of Nur Muhammadi and the emergence of a metaphysic in which Lawh, Qalam, and Aql all come together and become part of this complex of ideas which emerges as the Haqiqat al-Muhammadiyya. And this is one of the more profound dimensions of Islamic metaphysics. But at the root of it is this development associated with the first creation complex of hadith. But we don't want to go in that direction at the moment. Let's go back to Raghib. He says, about this hadith, he comments, it's very interesting. He quotes it now in the form, أَوَّلُ مَا خَلَقَ. He says, now, if aql was a non-essential accident, arad, an existential quality subsisting in matter, according to what a certain group claims, it means the mutakallimun, the Asharites and the Mu'tazila, then its being the first of created beings could not be true, for the reason that the existence of a thing pertaining to the non-essential accidents, al-a'rad, is inconceivable prior to the existence of an underlying substance to carry it, i.e. reason must be an immaterial substance. Now what's going on here? First of all, the mutakallimun, from the time of the early Mu'tazila down to the Ash'arites and the Maturidis and the Imamiyya and their kalam, they divided the world up into a series of things which are called jawhar, substance, and arad, qualities. And that the jawhar are the underlying substances, and the qualities like color, shape, form, texture, are accidents inhering in the underlying substance. This is the physical theory of the mutakallimun. And that this is what they also explained aql to be a necessary knowledge, remember? So then he's combating this. But isn't that what Ghazali said also in Ihya? Some people say that it's an arad, and they're wrong, right? Some people imagine that it's necessary knowledge, which is an arad, and it's wrong. So he got this idea from Raghib. Raghib is attacking the standard kalam view of aql, and he's implying that the philosophical view of aql is jawhar, substance. I think I'm losing some of you. Must be the preferred view. So he's actually defending what people like Farabi and Ibn Sina would have understood about aql. So this is a fundamental break in the tradition, and in an innovation. He is saying aql is jawhar basit, mujarrad an al-madda, simple, immaterial substance, completely free of matter. That's the philosophical definition of aql, and of nafs, and of soul as well, right? But the kalam view is that aql is an arad. It's an accident which subsists in an underlying material substance, such as the body. You see, the mutakallimun said, people like Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari and Maturidi and the others, they said, and the Mu'tazila also, they said, I have my body, it's made up of atoms, and in the atoms of my body, the jawhar, arise a number of accidents, a'rad, things like my ideas, my opinions, my feelings, my thoughts, my intelligence. It's an arad in my body, you know. It doesn't exist without an underlying material substrate called jism, right? That's the theological view of the human being, haqiqat al-insan. So in order to understand what Raghib al-Isfahani is doing here, we have to have some basic acquaintance with Islamic theology and philosophy and understand the debates between them. So Ghazali himself now, as we'll see, departs from the theology of his Asharite school and adopts a philosophical position by insisting that aql is a jawhar, not an arad. That's a major shift in intellectual adherence. So even if he was against the philosophers, he adopted more from them than he would have maybe cared to admit. So that we go on with Raghib's discussion. I'll just summarize a few things. I hope I'm not losing you. I hope I'm not boring you. And then he goes on to quote a number of statements by the Prophet, like the next page. The Prophet also said, "La deena liman la aqla lahu." There is no faith practiced for one lacking intelligence. And do not marvel at a man's Islam until you know the resolution of his aql. Uqtat aqluhu. This is another famous early hadith found in Dawood's book, and etc. So he goes on to identify aql with God's Khalifatullah, and that without such a presence of a immaterial substance within the human called aql, and here from ghariza we have some kind of immaterial substance which could become an intellectual principle at the source of cosmos as well. There seems to be an opening here to a more metaphysical approach to intellectuality, if you will. The kind that we've heard repeatedly in the last few days from our esteemed scholars who have come and given their remarks here, which they've all assumed to be somehow the given or the preferred frame of reference. But my understanding is to get to that frame of reference took